The night my mother lifted a crystal flute and wished me out of her life. The chandelier above our table scattered light like ice, and I felt something inside me crack clean through. "Here's to the truest gift I could receive," she said, looking straight at me across the linen and silver. "Freedom from certain obligations." Her mouth smiled. Her eyes did not. A few people laughed, uncertain. I did what I'd done my whole life, held my breath, and tried to pretend it didn't hurt. If you've ever had to cut loose from someone you love for the sake of your own sanity, you'll understand why that single toast became the match to a fuse I'd been wrapping around my life since childhood. Before I tell you how completely I honored her wish, how I disappeared, let me take you back to the beginning, so you'll know what those words detonated. I grew up on the edge of Philadelphia in a narrow house, with every surface polished to gleam and a mother who believed good girls were reflections she could control. My earliest memories are not of lullabies or picnics, but of being adjusted. Chin tucked, shirt straightened, voice lowered. Maya, my mother, Delia, would whisper through the firm smile she wore like a uniform, "You're such a pretty girl when you try. Don't slouch. Don't talk too loud. Don't draw attention." It was never, "I love what you made, but you missed a spot." Never, "Beautiful, but your friend's picture is neater." If I brought home a drawing with a sky full of orange suns and purple birds, she would smooth the paper flat, tap a pale fingernail against the bird with the crooked tail, and ask, "Why don't you ever take your time?" Then the picture would vanish into the trash, replaced by a fresh sheet and a lecture on standards. My father balanced her. To everyone else, he was a quiet engineer who preferred coffee at the kitchen table to cocktail parties. To me, he was warmth. He came home smelling like metal and rain and let me sit on the garage floor while he tuned his old motorcycle. "You're my bright spark," he would say whenever I showed him a science experiment or a story I'd scribbled. He saved my drafts. He taped my crooked-tailed birds to the side of the garage fridge. He would kiss my forehead and whisper like it was a secret only we shared, "You're enough." When I was 12, his heart gave out on a summer afternoon, and I found him collapsed near the hydrangeas. The ambulance lights scribbled red and blue across our tidy rooms. At the hospital, Mom stood rigid, like a statue carved out of frost, and when the doctor delivered the news, her gaze clicked to me. "You were with him," she said evenly, like she was pinning a document to a file. "You know his heart is faulty. Why weren't you paying better attention?" Grief laid its hand over my mouth. Guilt climbed inside my chest and nested there. From that day on, I lived like an apology, overachieving as if straight A's could rewind a heart, caring for Mom as if cups of tea and paid bills might soften the words she'd said. They never did. High school was a performance. I became captain of the debate team. I edited the school paper. I collected honors with the desperation of a child trying to bribe a storm to pass. For every ribbon, Mom had a measuring stick. Clara's daughter got into Easton Academy. Mia stands straighter when she speaks. When I earned a full scholarship to Lakewood University, 3 states away, a place where nobody knew I was the girl who was always too much and never enough, Mom stared at the acceptance letter and said, "College isn't a craft class, Maya." You'll see. I didn't see. I thrived. I graduated at the top of my class with a double major in economics and behavioral finance. Mom didn't come to the ceremony. She texted that she'd developed a migraine and sent a frowning emoji, which somehow made it worse. My dating life fared no better. The first serious boyfriend I ever brought home, a kind med student named Evan who laughed with his whole face, left our dinner still smiling. 5 days later, he broke things off because he needed to focus, and I later learned my mother had found his number and called to warn him about my emotional fragility and impossible expectations. It became a pattern. I'd fall in love with someone tender. Mom would take them aside in the kitchen to mention my faults. Within a month, the relationship would be ash. "I'm protecting you," she'd say when I cried. "You pick men who won't last." I made a life anyway. By 35, I was a senior financial advisor at a boutique firm in Center City, guiding high-net-worth clients toward portfolios that made sense. I bought a sunlit condo near Rittenhouse Square because I love the view of the trees and the Sunday market and the way the city blushes pink at dusk. I arranged a life with the precise, careful attention Mom always demanded. And I supported her. After my father died, she never returned to work. At first it was grief, then it was habit. She lived on the remainder of his pension and the tail end of a life insurance policy until both thinned, and without any fanfare, I began paying the property taxes, the utilities, the insurance, the monthly minimums on the credit cards she called for emergencies, which somehow included embroidered napkins and a new set of china. Every Sunday, I drove to her townhouse in Ardmore, stocked her fridge, watered her plants, and sat cross-legged on her carpet while she complained about neighbors who parked crooked and the audacity of peonies blooming too early. I told myself it was love. Sometimes it felt like a ledger I could never balance. For her 65th birthday, I decided to perform one more miracle. I rented the back room at the Copper Lantern, a gracious old bistro off Walnut Street with velvet banquettes, antique mirrors, and the kind of servers who move like shadows. I ordered arrangements of pale peonies and ranunculus because she adored them when I was a little girl. I hired a photographer to capture her with her oldest friends. I had a baker hand-paint the frosting on her cake in the same shade as her favorite silk scarf. And I took my grandmother's emerald brooch to a jeweler in Old City to have the tarnish removed and the cracked clasp replaced with white gold. My grandmother had left it to me, a final, quiet rebellion after a lifetime of enduring my mother's critiques. Mom loved that brooch like it was a crown. I thought a lot of things. This year will be different, I told my therapist, Dr. Reyes, the week before. She'll see. Dr. Reyes tilted her head. What will you do if she doesn't? I looked at my hands. I don't know. The evening arrived like a promise. Candles winked in glass cylinders. The private room smelled faintly of lemon and butter and something sweet baking. Friends filtered in wearing pearls and navy blazers, and each one squeezed my arm and said some variation of, "She's lucky to have you." Mom arrived 15 minutes late, carrying a clutch that matched the shoes I bought her last Christmas. Her silver hair was sculpted into a perfect wave. I stepped forward with my arms open. She tapped her cheek for a kiss that didn't land. "The valet took forever," she said, handing me her coat. "And this room is too dark. People our age can't see in a cave. And lilies? You know they make me sneeze." "They're peonies," I said softly. "Your favorite." She hummed without looking. "If you say so." Dinner unfolded in that particular martial way of good restaurants, courses arriving in a choreography you barely noticed until you were full. Mom presided at the center of the table like a queen in exile. She sent her steak back because medium was not, to her, a concept but a failure. She asked me to alert the waiter that the wine glasses were a little foggy. When I leaned in, she waved me away like a fly. Before dessert, I stood and faced her with the velvet box the size of a sparrow's nest sitting in my palm. Suddenly my hands were damp. Suddenly every steady speech I'd ever given in front of clients ran away. "Mom," I began, "I wanted to give you something special." I set the box in front of her and lifted the lid. The emeralds caught candlelight and turned the tabletop into a green lake. For one breath, her face softened into something like wonder. Then she closed the lid with the same crispness she used to fold laundry and said, "Too loud for the size of the room. Your grandmother should have left this to me. She spoiled you." Silence fell like snow. Vivian, her oldest friend, touched her wrist. "Delia," she murmured. "It's beautiful." Mom smiled at Vivian and picked up her water glass. She didn't look at me. The cake arrived. The servers dimmed the lights. We sang. The photographer lifted his lens. Mom stood, poised, and cleared her throat. "I'm grateful to be surrounded by true friends tonight," she said. "This year I've learned the value of authenticity. It is such a relief to let go of." She glanced at me, and I watched her choose the word. "Pretenses." Her crystal kissed her teeth. Laughter twitched at the corners of mouths. I stared at the scatter of sugar pearls melting into the frosting and realized my appetite was gone. Later, in the car, the brooch in its box lay on her lap like a closed eye. When I pulled into her driveway and shifted into park, she said, dinner was adequate. Next time choose somewhere with better lighting. And less fuss. I swallowed. Did you mean it? What you said about letting go of pretenses. She didn't move. Must you take everything personally? It sounded specific. She sighed, that theatrical exhale she used when sales clerks moved too slowly. Maya, our relationship has always been heavy. I did my duty. I raised you into a functioning adult. That doesn't obligate me to play Mother of the Year now. You keep score with those bills. It's unbecoming. That's your father's influence, always tabulating. Love shouldn't come with itemized receipts. She opened the door, stepped out, walked toward the porch light like a small, determined ship. She didn't look back. I don't remember driving home. I remember my living room looking like a hotel lobby I didn't belong to. I remember lying awake while the city's midnight sirens slid past my windows and thinking a single, clean thought, enough. By dawn, I had a plan. If my mother wanted me gone, I would give her the thing she wanted with the precision of a professional. I called my office and left a message for my boss that I needed emergency personal leave. 10 minutes later, he texted, "Take what you need. We'll cover." I opened a legal pad and made columns. There is comfort in lists. After years of managing complex portfolios, I could unwind financial ties like a seamstress rip-stitching a knot. By noon, I was sitting in the glass conference room of my own firm with Nadia Patel, a colleague I trusted with other people's fortunes and, now, my own. I need to sever everything tied to my mother, I told her. Every automatic draft, every shared account, every place my name or money touches her life. Nadia nodded and clicked her pen. Let's map it. 3 hours later, I had canceled every payment flowing from my accounts to hers. The joint checking account we used for her household expenses frozen. My name removed from her credit cards and utility accounts. Her name removed as beneficiary from my life insurance and retirement funds. The mortgage on her house, technically hers, but I had been quietly making the payments for years at her request, no longer came from me. There may be fallout, Nadia warned gently. Are you prepared? Not for her sake, I said. For mine. From there, I called Darren Cole, a realtor I'd sent at least a dozen clients. Private sale, I told him. No sign. No listing. Cash buyer if possible. I'll take 15% under market for speed. You in trouble? He asked. I'm getting out of it, I said. At the post office, I rented a P.O. box and forwarded my mail. At home, I opened my drawers and put my life on a scale. I packed clothes that felt like my soft jeans, my father's flannel shirt with the frayed cuffs, the blue dress I bought with my first bonus. I took the photo of my dad laughing with grease on his nose, the dog-eared paperback he'd read to me when I was small, a ceramic dish a college friend had made. The art I bought to impress Mom stayed. The formal dishes stayed. The couch she said looked adult stayed. That night, I wrote a letter. It took 7 tries to boil 35 years into something honest that wouldn't burn us both. Mom, last night you said the greatest gift would be to let go of obligations. I am honoring your wish. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. My support has ended. The bills, the house, everything in your name is yours to manage as it should be. This isn't punishment. It's clarity. I cannot be your solution. I cannot be your mirror. I release us both from what we've been pretending is love. Please don't try to find me. M. I slid the letter under her door at midnight. The porch smelled like wet leaves. When I straightened up, I expected to feel triumphant. I felt empty. Sometimes freedom is a silence you have to learn to live inside. I checked into a motel by the interstate under a different name and fell asleep to the sound of trucks breathing in their parking stalls. In the morning, I used cash to buy coffee strong enough to make my teeth buzz. By the end of the week, Darren had a buyer. I signed papers with a hand that barely shook, moved what I could fit into my car, and pointed my hood west. I didn't have a destination. Away was the only address that mattered. I drove over mountains that looked like sleeping animals and plains that made the sky look too big for its frame. I ate sandwiches in rest stops and memorized the seams of my steering wheel and cried randomly at billboards. I didn't look at my old email. I didn't answer unknown numbers. I did not check on the weather in Ardmore. On the 4th day, Oregon opened in front of me like a postcard, firs sharp as pencils, a river braided with light. Portland felt far enough and unjudging enough and, most importantly, mine. I rented a one-bedroom on the east side with creaky floors and windows that surrendered to every sunrise. I went to a thrift store and bought a mismatched set of dishes in shades of sea glass. I put a plant on the windowsill and promised to keep it alive. A week after I left, my old assistant forwarded a voicemail my mother had left on the office line before she realized it no longer led to me. Maya, the lawn service says you canceled. The electric company claims the autopay stopped. Call them and fix it. And me. Fix me. Where are you? There was no mention of my letter. 10 days later, Jenna, the same assistant, emailed me at the address I'd given her for emergencies. Maya, your mom came by. She was upset. Security asked her to leave. Are you safe? I wrote back, I'm okay. Thank you. Please send any communication to Dr. Reyes. The messages escalated the way storms do. My daughter has vanished, she posted on social media, reenacting a mother's worry for an audience that clapped in the comments. After everything I've done for her, people brought virtual casseroles of sympathy and outrage. People who knew us both wrote, "Are you sure that's what happened?" and were drowned out by sorrow and anger. 3 weeks in, Vivian called Dr. Reyes to pass along that my mother had caused a scene at the bank when they refused to discuss a frozen joint account that was no longer, legally and spiritually, hers. She told the manager her daughter always handled it, Vivian said, voice brittle with the strain of friendship during someone else's reckoning. She doesn't know how to pay her own bills. A month after my departure, the first letter from the mortgage company arrived at my old condo, forwarded to my P.O. box. I didn't open it. 2 days later, a message reached Dr. Reyes. My mother had been taken to urgent care after Vivian found her on the kitchen floor hyperventilating, and the doctor had given her a small white bottle of calm. She kept asking for Maya, Vivian said. It was the first time I heard her say your name without a complaint attached. At 6 weeks, she left a voicemail at the new number only Dr. Reyes had. I don't understand why you did this, she said, her voice small and careful as if I were a glass she might break. Come home. I miss you. The word miss tripped out of her like a foreign language phrase she wasn't sure she'd pronounced correctly. 2 months after, she received a foreclosure warning. Her house, the tidy stage on which she performed confidence, had equity enough to rescue her if she made good choices. She didn't know how. Vivian, 80 and impatient with drama, drove her to a financial counselor at a local nonprofit. You have 2 options, the counselor said, kindly brutal. Sell and downsize or let the bank take it and start over with worse terms. Vivian called Dr. Reyes afterward and cried. She read me Maya's letter, she said. She finally took responsibility for the things she said, for all the ways she leaned so hard on you that you disappeared. It's like she took off a mask and found she'd forgotten her own face beneath it. 3 months after my vanishing, a letter arrived at my P.O. box with my mother's tight, elegant handwriting unraveling across the envelope. I held it for a long minute. Paper can feel like a live thing in your hands. Maya, I'm not good at saying sorry. I'm practicing. I was angry when you left. Then I was terrified. And then I got quiet. In the attic, I found albums I boxed up after your father died. There you are on the first day of 2nd grade, with a backpack too big for your frame and a smile I don't remember letting you keep. There you are on a stage with a ribbon, looking for me in the crowd I didn't join. I was unkind. I was cruel. I learned mothering from a woman who never approved of anything I did. I promised myself I would be better. I wasn't. After your father died, I was jealous of your love for him, and I took it out on you. None of that is an excuse. I don't want money. I sold the house. I'm moving to a senior apartment I can keep up with my pension and Social Security. I joined a group for parents estranged from their children. It's awful and also honest. For the first time, I'm seeing the shape of myself. You didn't break me. You didn't owe me. I am sorry. Delia, I read it 3 times. I folded it back into its envelope. I did not respond. While my mother began to learn the alphabet of living alone, I learned what it was to build a life that didn't revolve around being someone else's solution. Portland surprised me by being gentle. The rain felt like forgiveness. I walked under maple trees with leaves big enough to be hats. I drank coffee at a place that wrote your name on a cup in chalk and remembered it tomorrow. I found a job with a small advisory firm that specialized in ethical investments, helping teachers and nurses and people who believed in clean oceans steward their money in ways that made them proud. During my interview, the managing partner said, "Around here, we measure success in ease of sleep," and I nearly cried because I hadn't slept that well since I was 11. I found a new therapist, Dr. Lin, who had soft sweaters and a way of asking a question that made you notice your own heartbeat. Estrangement can be a wound and a medicine, she said. What would it be to honor both truths? For one session, she asked me to write a letter to the girl I'd been before I learned to apologize for breathing. I wrote it at my tiny table with my plant leaning toward the window. Little Maya, you are not a reflection. You are not a ledger. You are not an apology. You didn't break Dad's heart. You didn't fail to hold back a tide. You are a girl who reads menus like novels and laughs with her whole body and sees patterns other people miss. You do not have to make yourself small to be safe. I read it aloud and cried until Dr. Lin passed me a velvet soft tissue and said, "There you are. Making friends as an adult is awkward." In Philadelphia, my life had been scheduled. Dinners with clients, Sundays with mom, networking events that smelled like shrimp and ambition. In Portland, I walked to a community garden and asked if they needed hands. They did. I carried sacks of compost and planted starts that looked too delicate to make it and learned the names of strangers with dirt under their nails. I joined a hiking group full of people who carried trail mix in old jam jars and talked about books with the reverence some people reserve for religion. I joined a Wednesday night pottery class where I made lopsided bowls and a single, perfect mug. At a New Year's bonfire in a friend's backyard, I met Rowan. He taught high school history and wore a watch he'd inherited from his grandfather and laughed when I told him I'd once lost a debate because I used the word perhaps too many times. The first time he cooked for me omelets with the cheese I said I loved, he asked questions and then kept quiet to listen to the answers. He didn't strap expectations to my shoulders or hold my past against me like collateral. When he dropped me off after our fourth date, he said, "I like you, Maya," and it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a hand offered without a rope. The first 6 months felt like learning to walk in my own life. Some days I sprinted. Some days the floor tilted and I had to sit down. Holidays were the hardest. Thanksgiving knocked the wind out of me, and I spent it under a blanket eating stuffing I made the way Dad used to, too much sage, toasted edges, and watching a movie that required no thinking. Christmas arrived with muscle memory. I caught myself reaching for my phone to check Mom's wish list and laughed, wetly, at how reflex can masquerade as love. New Year's felt like turning a page slowly, so I wouldn't tear it. At 7 months, my boss called me into his office and said, "We've noticed what you bring to clients goes beyond returns." He slid a new contract across the desk. "You make people feel safe. Let's make room for you to do that more." I walked home through a rain that felt celebratory and texted Rowan, who sent back a string of confetti and then showed up with champagne and dumplings. When we had our first argument about nothing, really, the dishes, and how many times one person should remind the other to turn off the stove, he didn't sulk. He didn't punish. He said, "I'm upset," like it was weather that would pass if we brought it snacks. We listened. We apologized. We adjusted. I cried afterward because I didn't know love could be a place you could put your full weight on. A year after the toast that split me, a photo arrived from Vivian, Mom, hair softer, a watercolor in her hands, smiling tentatively like she was practicing a language she wasn't fluent in. Underneath, a message. She moved into a smaller place. She joined a book club. She calls me sometimes just to ask how I am. Thought you'd want to see. I stared at that smile for a long time. Then I did something unplanned and uncharacteristic. I booked a ticket to Philadelphia under my own name. I didn't announce my trip. I stayed in a hotel downtown and walked the city like I was reintroducing two wary friends. The park near my old condo looked the same. The bakery that had piped Mom's favorite cake still made the pastry that shattered into sugar when you bit it. Nothing had changed. Everything had. On my second day, I visited Vivian, whose apartment smelled like lavender and coffee. She hugged me like someone who has waited at a window for a ship too long at sea. She's different, she said as we sat in her kitchen, knees almost touching. Not completely. There are fingerprints you can't scrub off a soul. But she's quieter in the places that used to be sharp. Should I see her? The question tasted like metal. Vivian took my hand and held it the way she used to hold mine when I was 9 and scraped my knees at her pool. Only if it won't cost you what you finally gained. I left Vivian's building intending to go back to the hotel, but grief and curiosity are cousins who share a car and take each other's keys. I drove to my mother's new neighborhood, parked across from a senior apartment building with planter boxes that needed watering, and planned to merely look. I was ordering a coffee from the shop next door when she walked in wearing the same perfume she'd worn my whole life, a sterile, powdery floral that always made my throat itch. She didn't recognize me from behind. It wasn't until the barista called, "Maya, oat latte," that she turned, saw me, and pressed both hands to her mouth. "Maya," she said, and it sounded like my name in a different dialect. "Hi, Mom." We stood, strangers with the same bones. My pulse tapped a frantic rhythm at my wrists. She looked older and smaller, and somehow softer at the edges, like a bar of soap almost worn through. "Are you?" she began, then stopped, rephrased without accusation, "okay?" "I am," I said. "Are you?" She nodded. Tears made her eyes glassy. "Would you sit with me? Just for a minute." "You can say no." We took our cups to a table near the window. The words on my tongue were small talk, and I hated them immediately. "They changed the biscotti recipe," I said, and we both laughed at how ridiculous and necessary it was to say something else first. "Vivian told me you're in Portland," she said finally. "I'm glad." She fiddled with the lid of her cup. "I joined a group," she added. "The way people add, I learned to swim as an adult. For parents who have lost their children without funerals. It's called the Mender's Circle. At first, I went to ask how to get you back. Then I shut up and listened. We walked with our cups to the park so we could sit on a bench under a tree that looked like mercy. For a long while we watched a toddler struggle with a stubborn zipper. Then Mom set her coffee down, opened her purse, and handed me a small leather journal that had been worn soft at the corners. I started writing. Dr. Collins, her therapist, apparently said if I put it on paper, I might see the shape of it. My childhood. Your father. The ways I broke you. The ways I've been trying to bend myself into something better. You don't have to read it. I just want you to know I finally see it. She told me about her own mother, a woman I remembered as a scent of lavender and a rigid smile. I had never known the rest. She could cut you in half with a sentence, Mom said plainly. Nothing I did was enough. When you were born, I promised to break that line. She looked at her hands. I failed. When your father loved you the way I wanted to be loved, I was uncharitable. After he died, I didn't know what to do with my anger and grief, so I stored them in you, like a closet. She shook her head once. It was wrong. We said very little after that. It felt like stepping onto a bridge that had been under construction for a long time by crews who worked at night, quiet and unseen. I live in a small apartment now, she said finally, with something that sounded suspiciously like pride. I can afford it. I know how to pay for my life. She smiled at the toddler, whose zipper had surrendered to the careful attention of a kind stranger. I paint watercolors. None of them are any good. That isn't the point. I can't promise anything, I said. The part of me that had once lived on apology held its breath. The part of me who had learned to be a woman without a mirror put a hand on my knee. But if you want, we can try email. Just email for a while. She nodded, quick and grateful in a way that made my chest ache. I would like that, she said. Thank you for not crossing the street when you saw me. She didn't ask where I was staying. She didn't reach to touch my face. She let me leave without extracting a future. It was the most generous thing she'd ever done. On the flight back west, I held the journal, but didn't open it. I waited until I could bring it to Dr. Lin, who sat with me while I read pieces that made me feel seen and others that made me run hot with anger. Healing is ugly work. We didn't try to make it pretty. 2 years have passed since that night at the Copper Lantern. In the distance, it looks almost cinematic, a woman in a black dress asking for freedom and a daughter granting it like a wish. Up close, it was 1,000 small choices and a few brave ones. I'm a partner now at the Oregon firm. I specialize in helping women disentangle their finances from ex-husbands and expectations. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I leave early to volunteer at a nonprofit that teaches young adults aging out of foster care how to budget and invest. Sometimes I catch myself saying, "You're allowed to know this," and I think of little Maya, and I send her a smile through time. Rowan proposed on a trail above the Columbia River Gorge while swifts stitched the sky with their flight. He didn't get down on one knee. He said, "We make what we want into a life. Will you keep making it with me?" I said yes, not because saying yes was a performance anyone expected, but because I wanted the tomorrow we were already building. When I told Mom over the phone weeks later, after we had kept our emails gentle and true for many months, there was a pause. Then she said, "Congratulations. May I send you something? If you don't like it, donate it." It felt like a miracle to be offered a gift with no strings tied to it. At Christmas, she flew out to Portland and stayed in a guest house down the street because I asked her to and because she understood boundaries were fences that kept both of us safe. She brought a tin of cookies she'd baked badly on purpose and a scarf she'd knit with little mistakes that made it hers. She watched Rowan's niece show her a crayon drawing and said, "Tell me about your colors, not you went outside the lines." I watched her face when Rowan's mother hugged her, and in that instant, she looked like a woman looking through a window at something she'd never seen before and realizing she could learn it. We're not a story with a bow. We're people. There are days when my skin goes cold at the ping of a text from her, and I breathe through it and answer when I'm able. There were 2 phone calls I didn't take because I didn't have the strength. There was one email she sent during a bad week that wandered close to old habits. "If you loved me," and I replied, "I won't continue this conversation if you use love as a cudgel." She apologized, and I believed her. We keep our conversations shorter than either of us would prefer because our pasts sit at the table too, and we don't pretend they don't. At her last birthday, a small dinner at a bistro near her apartment, she raised a water glass, blinked at the candlelight, and said, "To second chances." And to the daughter brave enough to leave when staying was killing us both. No one laughed. No one flinched. We just clinked our glasses, and I looked at the woman across from me who had once wished me gone and realized, astonishingly, that we had both granted that wish in the only way that could save us. Was it revenge? Not in the movie sense. I didn't ruin her. I didn't broadcast her worst days to an audience who would cheer. My version of revenge was absence that forced her to finally look in a mirror. It was building a life so rich with peace that her power to disturb it dissolved. It was saying, for both of us, never again to love that wears a mask. If you're listening and you've made a decision like mine, or you're standing at the edge, toes curled over, terrified, know this. It isn't simple. It isn't tidy. People who've never lived it will tell you what they'd do if they were you. They aren't you. The path to healing might look like leaving all at once. It might look like staying and building fences. It might look like disappearing long enough for the other person to discover whether they're willing to build their own bridge. You're allowed to choose yourself. You're allowed to change your mind. When I think of my father now, I don't see the hospital light or hear my mother's accusation. I see grease on his nose. I hear him whisper, "You're enough." Sometimes I catch my reflection in a window, wild hair in Portland rain, wool coat, plant tucked under an arm like a friend, and I say it out loud so the girl I was can hear, "You are." And when my mother texts me a photo of a terrible watercolor of a lemon and says, "It's crooked," I write back, "It's yours." We are learning a new language together, one apology and boundary at a time, and for now, it is enough.